Good morning. I have a reading I want to start off this morning with from Annie Dillard from her book Pilgrimage at Tinker Creek. It's just a small piece I want to share with you. She says this: "It is still the first winter in January, and I've got great plans. I've been thinking about seeing. There are lots of things to see, unwrapped gifts and free surprises. The world is fairly studded and strewn with pennies cast broadside from a generous hand. But, and this is the point, who gets excited by a mere penny? If you follow one arrow, if you crouch motionless on a bank to watch a tremulous ripple thrill on the water and are rewarded by the sight of a muskrat kid paddling from its den, will you count that sight of a chip of copper only and go your rueful way? It is dire poverty indeed when a man is so malnourished and fatigued that he won't stoop to pick up a penny. But if you cultivate a healthy poverty and simplicity so that finding a penny will literally make your day, then since the world is in fact planted in pennies, you have with your poverty but a lifetime of days. It's that simple. What you see is what you get." Here ends this morning's reading. At my first church in Rockport, Mass, I had a parishioner who was 99 years old, Stan Burkhart. He died just about a month shy of his 100th birthday, and Stan loved to tell jokes, really. He would often send little notes with a juicy kind of tidbit written in on top of what, the message of the card had said. They were often one-liners kind of things. I once got a card from him that had, "I couldn't help but think of you, Reverend, when I read this joke. So here it is. How do you make holy water? Well, you boil the hell out of it." Do you know how many times I've retold that joke? I still think it's funny. Stan categorized that joke under religious, of course, and he didn't just tell jokes, but he collected them. And in addition to categorizing jokes according to subject matter, he'd also file them according to the days of the year. So if you went to his house, you would find that he had this shoebox and it was filled with all these jokes with, like theme, days of the year, and he had them written on little 3x5 cards. Now, every day he would take one of those little 3x5 cards, and he always wore a suit jacket when he went out, and he would stick it in the inside pocket of his suit jacket, and he would go out to all of the little shops on Bearskin Neck. If you've ever been to Cape Ann in Massachusetts, and he'd stop in just to say hi to all of the people that work there. But before he'd go in, he'd like pull out the card, read the joke for the day, and then put it back in. It wasn't just jokes that he collected, it was also birthday cards. If he knew you at all, he knew when your birthday was. And again, he showed me once when I was at his house, he had a little box that he had, January, February, March, April, and in them were little small cards that would fit into that box that he had the person's name already written on the outside along with their address. And then he would remember because he had written in pencil on the far bottom right hand side, if you really paid attention to it, when he was supposed to send it so to get there on your birthday. At his funeral, the sanctuary was packed. There were like 200 people. We had to open up the vestibule so other people could hear, and there were folks of all ages, I kid you not, from like teenagers to other people about his own age. At one point during the service, I said, who here has gotten a birthday card from Stan? And I'm not exaggerating, like everybody there rose their hand and said they did. And when, they were laughing and crying, and those simple little birthday cards and those silly jokes were why most of those folks were there. So Stan's memorial service helped me answer a question, right? What makes an individual life matter? What makes a life kind of weighty, heavy enough to leave an imprint on the lives of others? Stan really didn't have a so-called successful career. A lot of folks never even knew what the heck it was that he did when he retired. He was smart enough, but by no means like well-read or full of insights. A wise old man, but not one that you would describe him that way. Despite his love for telling jokes, he wasn't really an extrovert. He was kind of a shy person who collected them. He wasn't the natural leader of a group. Stan, though, simply was generous. There are many ways, of course, one can be generous, many ways one can give themselves away to others, right? The jokes and birthday cards were just Stan's way, Stan's particular way. He wasn't selfish that way. That's what stood out really and kind of like amazed people about him, even indebted them to him. The jokes were never about trying to make himself seem funny. They were always about making other people happy. The birthday cards were just one example of the way he took the time to pay attention to people. He wasn't just trying to get people to pay attention to him. When I think back at his memorial and the last conversation that I had with him, he would have been shocked to have found so many people that came actually to that memorial service. And I remember talking to him about his life, about his work and life, and he said it was just pretty ordinary. He worked on copper pots actually for the Hershey chocolate company originally. And on that last visit I had with him, he was kind of a little sullen, a little distracted. He wanted to make it to his 100th birthday, but he was feeling a little downtrodden. And he was turning inward and trying to make sense of his life. And that wasn't big and grandiose or memorable, as a lot of people would think of it as. And he wasn't a change agent, right? He wasn't the boss or a CEO. He didn't travel extensively or really at all. He was kind of a small town guy with small town needs and wants. But at the end of his life, right, he was thinking about the fact that in his mind, he hadn't made a big splash. He hadn't wowed people. He wasn't leaving this largesse of personality or character, or position or power or difference. So did his life matter without the big dramatic life? I remember leaving feeling like, why is this guy haunted by bigness? Can't he see what I see? And then it occurred to me, Stan isn't really that different than the rest of us. We're all haunted by bigness. That's what counts as doing all right most of the time in our society, especially in a culture that glorifies self-made men and supersized, that lionizes like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and, Jeff Bezos. We say we're immune to those cliches, but when you hear it often enough, it's not hard to buy into that great mantra about endless opportunities for those who stick with it. And the sky is the limit, really, for anybody who wants it badly enough. And not just buy into it, but become blinded by it. For someone like Stan, he didn't do the big, bold, grand things. I've thought for years, I wish he could have seen all the pennies at his memorial. In fact, this is the most astounding thing to me. There were like these teenage boys that showed up to his memorial, but they had all worked at those stores on Bearskin Neck, and Stan knew each of them by name. And I think those kids were captivated by someone who doled out kindness like it was candy, really. They had each gotten cards from Stan on his birthday. And when you think about it, like they had never received such a thing except from family or friends of the family. And sure enough, his doctor and dentist and cleaning lady all showed up. His barber was there, the woman who owned the bakery next to his house. The entire church board was there, all knowing Stan had taught them a thing or two about what being that burst of light for another, especially when having a stressful day. Because Stan, with his simple life, his simple attention, his simple awareness, can make your life better. And while watching Stan, it reminded you that it's not that hard, actually, to make that extra effort yourself to those in your life. His children were 78 and 79 when he died, and they were lost. They thought their dad was a hero, not because of what he did with his life, but because how he was in his life, how he treated them, interacted with others, was in the world. Pennies were all around the room that day at that memorial, proof of a well-lived life, and yet bigness was somehow in the way at the end for Stan. And I don't really want to overstate it or, I don't know, get too dramatic myself today, but it has broken my heart for years, that last conversation with him. Seems to me the question we all wrestle with is, where do we find our meaning, our deep sense of belonging? Is it in the big stuff or in the little stuff? And when I say that, of course, I'm not just speaking about Stan, right? But all of us. Because there is, in this way, this fetish, this cultural fetish with bigness, with the idea that the winner takes all, that the winner is the only one who gets the prize. There's a way in which this pervasive cultural mentality tricks us all into diminishing our own precious coins. And I think that is exactly what Annie Dillard was trying to get at when she talks about fatigue, about being too fatigued to see what's in front of us as anything but a sad chip of copper. We dream often boldly and work hard to get those dreams. It's one of our special great gifts, but it's also one of life's great truths that we regularly fall short. No doubt about it, but often as human beings, we just don't do well with the gap. Tired from all the striving and warped from all the intense staring at our hope for our goal, our vision can't help but sometimes be a bit diminished. It can't help but sometimes see how far we've come and all we have done as anything but falling short. What we settled for less than we wanted, a sad chip of copper, which is crazy, right? I mean, it really is. And it just doesn't need to be. After all these years in the ministry, which I've been in the ministry for over 25 years, most of us can't fight against this fatigued short-sightedness, right? And yet on the other hand, we do also recognize, at least a part does recognize how crazy that is, right? And so unnecessary, which is exactly why I believe Annie Dillard is so emphatic about telling us to cultivate a healthy poverty and simplicity. I love that phrase, culture, healthy poverty. And in saying this, I don't think she is necessarily advising a life of less stuff or even less ambition, really, but rather a life with less cultural voices in our head. And it's not even really advice, I don't know, she's offering. It's more like she's just witnessing to a type of faith that consciously corrects our thinking. She simply is saying, get quiet, stop talking, stop thinking, stop comparing, and just look and listen. It's this oddly wonderful faith that if we can just make a little time to clear our heads and do nothing, the pennies will speak for themselves. And it's a type of faith that I think our Jewish friends get better than anything else. You know, their high holy days are coming up soon in September, the Day of Atonement, right? They begin with Rosh Hashanah and with Yom Kippur, the day of which they say the world is born anew. It's also the one day of the year that every single Jew within reach also, you know, kind of like shows up to synagogue, even Jews who never come at any other time of the year, sort of like Easter for Christians or potluck Sundays for Unitarians. It's the one day that the rabbis all secretly know they will be able to have everyone captive. Now, here's the crazy thing about the high holy days. What do those rabbis do with their captive audience? What do they do with this one chance to impact and influence their people? Truth is, they spend the entire day reading them the most boring part of the Torah. That's right, and I can't believe it when I first learned about it. You see, that's pretty much all Rosh Hashanah is, a day of having to listen to and sit with the most boring parts of the scripture endlessly for hours. And here's the even more crazy thing. The section of the Torah from which the readings comes pertains to two great moral and central theological stories of the entire Jewish scripture. At the front, the beginning, sits a story of Abraham arguing with God over the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's a powerful piece about the importance of fiercely fighting for what is right in the world, even if it puts you at odds with God. And then at the end of the section sits the arresting story of God commanding Abraham to take his son Isaac and sacrifice him as proof of Abraham's faithfulness. Another complex and compelling moral tale that challenges one to think hard about how far you are really willing to go for your beliefs and what you are willing to sacrifice. But in between these two grand dramas, there sits a ton of stories about tedium of daily life, striking mundane passages about the rituals of properly keeping your home, about people tending sheep or writing poems to the Lord, and meditating between squabbles and jealousies between kin and neighbors. And it is that tedium that our Jewish friends have to sit through for the entire day. And here's the thing, here's the magic actually about this. At some point during that mind-numbing kind of experience, the mind suddenly wakes up and shifts, and there's something that occurs. Those daily, simple things that seem tedious start sounding and looking differently, and they begin to speak their worth, okay? Despite inside folks who are deeply listening. They are deeply listening. They haven't shut anything off. Different voices and questions begin to fill their heads. Questions like, how am I treating my partner? Not just on those like big, dramatic, high-stake days like weddings and memorials or when someone's in a hospital, but on those regular days in between when we're cleaning out the garage. How do I look at and listen to my partner when I wake up in the morning? How do I talk to my kids when I've actually called them 7 times and they're not coming? How do I live and love? Not when challenged with a giant moral dilemma, but in between those dilemmas, during the small stories that in truth are the events that really make up our life. And to get to the significance of this, friends, to really get the significance of it and not just see this as sweet and sappy message about how our relationships matter most in life, you've got to remember 2 things about Judaism, okay? First of all, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are ultimately about atonement, about asking forgiveness for being on the wrong track and committing to realigning yourself with the holy. And then the other thing you got to remember is that Judaism doesn't really have a concept of heaven or the afterlife, okay? So unlike their sister faith, Christianity, in which getting back in right relationship with the people around you is ultimately a means or like a stepping stone to get into heaven, unlike that, what Judaism is saying here is that getting right with and caring for the ordinary relationships and daily tasks around you is heaven, is the point of the whole thing, the entire prize. Caring for small things is no small thing. That is where heaven is found. And so, my dear captive audience, my simple message for you today. Sometime in the days ahead, maybe even this very day, I don't know, make the time to impoverish yourself. Sit down, slow down, quiet yourself, stop talking, stop thinking, stop evaluating, and just look at and let those pennies speak. Let them tell you about your life. Some of them undoubtedly are a little oxidized. Some may be hiding under a plate in the kitchen or that old bike in the garage. If they are hidden, what are they saying to you? What relationship needs tending to? We've all got them. We've all got conversations or circumstances we kind of need to revisit, right? And get in right relationship with one another to start anew. Once you've done that, friends, that which was musty and grim will be glowing and reflect the wonders of all the pennies around you. And friends, there are, of course, other shiny pennies around you that don't even need work, right? That stay polished and pristine, that you do indeed continue to nurture, honor, and pay attention to. So celebrate those. Just let them glow and sparkle in the sunlight. So again, in the next couple of days, maybe even this very day, make the time to impoverish yourself. Sit down, slow down, quiet yourself, stop talking, stop thinking, stop evaluating, and just look at and let those pennies talk. Because the pennies, my friend, are the whole point of this wild, precious life. May it be so. Amen.